place of abundance. This is our destiny.
My childhood, my mother, I want them back. I want them back!
I want them back!
Fury Road premiered 9 years ago in Los Angeles. The film took 18 years to make, from conception to the big screen. Some say that it is such a monumental achievement because of the pain and suffering of the cast and crew in creating the film. So, can a standalone film, Furiosa in this case, with no actors from Fury Road returning, and much less pain in the process, deliver the same cinematic experience as Fury Road? In this episode, we look at the insane production process of Fury Road, a journey that in itself was absolute chaos, with last-minute location changes, actors fighting, and even Mother Nature revolting against making of the film. And does the upcoming Furiosa, based on trailers, interviews, and on-set photos, have the potential to match the quality of Fury Road? Can it become a sequel for the ages like Terminator 2 or Aliens? And does it need the production chaos of Fury Road to succeed? Well, let's find out. Born on the 3rd of March in 1945 in Chinchilla, Australia, George Miller would be a fan of film from an early age, sneaking into the local cinema every Saturday with his brothers to see films that were not really for his age. With no local film industry, George and his twin brother John, yes, there's two George Millers, would join medical school and eventually become doctors. During his career as a doctor, George worked in the emergency room where he would see the carnage of car accidents in rural Queensland. George tinkered with the camera in his spare time and made a short film that landed him at a director's workshop at the University of Melbourne. There he met Byron Kennedy, a producer and good friend that would shape George's career and life. When he was 31, George did what many aspiring filmmakers would do to achieve their dreams: ask friends and family for some cash to make their first feature film. So, in 1977, George and Byron raised some $350,000 from various sources and made Mad Max. With Mel Gibson joining the team straight out of drama school, they filmed like a little pack of wasteland riders, on locations they didn't have permit for, with little regard for safety and many dangerous stunts. When it launched in 1979, it was an immediate sensation, but not without sacrifices. There were many accidents on set, and the film crew gradually lost confidence in the director to a point where he considered quitting the production. Nonetheless, the audiences loved it, and the film would go on to make over $100 million at the box office, setting a Guinness World Record for most profitable film at the time. With Mad Max 2: The Road Warrior having a similar success and becoming a cult classic, the fame and glitter of Hollywood would soon come calling. His first encounter with Hollywood, making Mad Max 3: Thunderdome, was not an easy one. George, being ever honest and kind, was often taken advantage of by producers who didn't provide him with what he needed to make the film. For example, when he asked for 150 extras, only 75 would turn up, and so on and so on. On top of that, his longtime friend Byron died in a helicopter crash in 1983, leaving George without the advice of a trusted friend and producer who was not part of the studio system. George pushed through and finished Mad Max 3, then moved on to make Witches of Eastwick, which was another troubled production. He butted heads with the studio producers all the time and quit the set twice. Eventually, with support from actors Jack Nicholson, Susan Sarandon, and Cher, he finished the film, which proved to be a financial success. It's obvious that for George, it was not easy to adapt to the studio filmmaking in Hollywood. He was just used to not being interrupted with notes and restrictions to how he puts his vision on film. And then came Contact. You might think his third time working with studios would be lucky, but no sir. George's vision for the film was again contrasting with what the studios wanted to see. While he wanted to make a unique, special film, the producers wanted everything explained on the screen and eventually lost courage to support George and fired him. George handed the project over to Robert Zemeckis and sued Warner Brothers for breach of contract. The lawsuit stretched out for 2 years, but the settlement came out with an unexpected upside. Warner Brothers ceded the rights to Mad Max franchise back to George. But as they say in Hollywood, let bygones be bygones. So in 1995, Warner Brothers invited George back to pitch him a concept for a Mad Max TV series. This was a time before The Sopranos or Band of Brothers, when a TV series would be much lighter in tone and tend to have seasons of 24 episodes. While George passed on the idea, he met Brendan McCarthy, a TV writer at the time. Brendan bluntly asked George why he wouldn't make another Mad Max film. It was an honest question that got George thinking, yeah, why not?
I don't know exactly where, but I was walking across a pedestrian crossing, and halfway across the crossing, an idea came into my head. You can tell a Mad Max movie in which it was a continuous chase. At the same time, the notion was that there would be a number of women and that they would have a female road warrior who was helping them escape. And by the time I got to the other side of the road, I said, no, I'll put it aside. And then I was on a plane. This is probably 2 years after that initial thought. It was a late night flight from Los Angeles to Sydney, flying over the Pacific. And a good 2/3 of the story played out in my mind about what would happen, where this woman would be from. It was very important that Max get caught up in the story. What was Max's circumstance? What was the world, who the tyrant was? And I got really excited. It just kept sort of tumbling out. I remember landing in Sydney, and when I saw Doug Mitchell, I said, look, I think there's another Mad Max movie.
So the seed was planted, but it will take a long time to grow. George Miller went on to make Babe, that made $254 million at the box office and was nominated for 7 Oscars. In 1997, George assembled a small team to flesh out the story of Fury Road. At the time, George considered a few actresses for the main role. For Furiosa, his first choice was Uma Thurman, coming off the success of Gattaca and the not-so-successful Batman and Robin. Then Bridget Moynihan came up, who was unknown at the time, and even Monica Bellucci was considered, who was making a name for herself in Italy. Charlize Theron was also in the mix, but her casting agent said that she was not interested, something that Charlize later said she had no idea about. By 1998, the film moved to Universal Pictures and was teased in the industry newspapers, aiming for a release in summer 2001 or 2002, but Mel Gibson was not confirmed yet as returning. While the buzz was in full swing, Miller and the team were busy setting up the Mad Max room inside the boardroom at his offices in Sydney. The Mad Max room, as George liked to call it, was a space on the first floor of his office in Sydney, functioning as an ideas factory for Mad Max. Here they developed concepts for the story, character designs, settings, arranging them in a coherent way. This is where Fury Road was transformed from prose form, and the story of the film was laid out in 3,500 storyboard panels. There was no typed screenplay, just a series of hand-drawn panels like a never-ending black and white comic book covering the walls of the conference room. George was also a fan of Alfred Hitchcock that had a mantra for making his films, saying, "I try to make movies where they don't have to read the subtitles in Japan." There were character designs, of which some didn't make it in the finished film, like Furiosa with hair or with dreadlocks, or various designs of how her mechanical arm would look like and function, or designs for Immortan Joe that were different to start with due to a unique different backstory and variations of his mask. Characters like the Bullet Farmer and the People Eater were imagined at this time, which ended up looking different in the end. The character of Nux and the War Boys were initially conceived as Necro Boys. Even Koma, the Doof Warrior, was imagined at this time, and of course Mad Max, when Mel Gibson was still envisioned for the role. Every crazy idea was considered inside the Mad Max room, and each character had a backstory that justified their appearance and their design. And the cars had to be outrageous, but logical too for survival in a post-apocalyptic world. Each car, motorbike or truck had to tell the story of where its owner has been. The locations were also designed here, with the Citadel taking center stage and going through multiple variations. But more importantly, we get to see a sneak preview of Bullet Town, a location featured in the upcoming Furiosa. This is a settlement built on an oil lake with the sole purpose of making weaponry. It's heavily guarded with an epic bridge as an entrance, so I can't wait to see this in Furiosa. With the storyboards finished and the vision of the film in place, it was time for casting. George Miller was now thinking that Mel Gibson is a bit old, he was pushing 50, so he considered Brad Pitt or Johnny Depp for Max and Angelina Jolie for Furiosa. Coincidentally, Tom Hardy auditioned for a war boy at the time. Just remember, this is the 2000s. However, with the studio demanding a big star for such a major production, they reverted to Mel Gibson, considering he was the original Mad Max. By now, Mel Gibson was an icon worldwide, with films like Lethal Weapon, Maverick, The Patriot and Braveheart behind him. When he accepted to do the film, he did recognize that he was getting a bit old and that production needs to start as soon as possible so he could still be able to do it. With Mel Gibson on board, George Miller pitched the project to 20th Century Fox, and after 10 months of negotiating, they allocated $104 million to Fury Road, with $24 million going just to Mel Gibson alone, and set a shoot date for May 2003. Getting the money proved to be the easy part, and it was quick to go out the window too. After 9/11, the value of the dollar tanked, so the production budget was reduced overnight by 30%. That made 20th Century Fox chicken out, considering the many moving parts of the production that could not easily be put on a balance sheet. So the project was stopped, and George Miller had to pivot to another project that would define his career.
Mumble, a tune is like la 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 la.
Oh, okay. La la la.
At the same time as working on Happy Feet, George was still developing Fury Road, signing off designs and storylines coming from the Mad Max room. But something more impactful happened during this time. Drama coach and creative philosopher Nick Lathuris, who George knew from high school, joined the Fury Road team. The two of them spent hours and hours discussing the lore of the Mad Max world, the backstory of each character and their development arcs. Nick wrote a 190-page analysis of the story of Fury Road and what each character goes through during the film. It was during these long conversations that the story for Furiosa was born. It was part of a healthy storytelling process where you have to probe the coherence of the story, and you do that by creating in-depth backstories for the characters and the world. Miller never stopped thinking of Fury Road. The story kept being refined and refined until in 2009 he had the time to fully commit to making the film again. By now, Mel Gibson's implosion had happened, so casting started again in full swing. This time, considerations for Max were Michael Fassbender, Jeremy Renner, Armie Hammer, Eric Bana, Sam Worthington, the whole of Hollywood to be honest. However, George had a soft spot for Heath Ledger, with whom he had many discussions about the role, believing Ledger could bring the necessary depth to the troubled Max. After Ledger's tragic death, George was intrigued by another actor with similar intensity, Tom Hardy. When Tom and Armie Hammer auditioned together in the same room, Tom got so into his character that he spit in Armie's face. After that, Armie just told George to cast Tom, confident that he would be in good hands. Charlize wasn't the first to be considered for Furiosa either. Jessica Chastain auditioned, along with Gugu Mbatha-Raw, Ruth Negga and even Gal Gadot. After winning an Oscar for Monster in 2003, Charlize did a few projects, but none that she could sink her teeth into. So when she heard another Mad Max film was being cast for, she jumped at it and got it. By 2010, production finally seemed to be moving ahead. The location was set for Broken Hill, Australia, the same place that Road Warrior was filmed in 1980. The cars were built, the cast was ready to go, and the cash was in the bank. Planets seemed to be aligning. Two weeks prior to start of the shoot, Broken Hill was hit by biblical storms and experienced its second highest season of rain in 121 years. After all that rain, Broken Hill has turned from red, flat earth into a flower garden. So again, They had to put everything in storage and leave with their tails between their legs. There was no way they could shoot there and remove the grass and flowers with CGI later. Mother Nature was the winner this time. Two years later, production was gearing up again with June 2012 as the new date to start the shoot. In the past 2 years, Happy Feet 2 was released. This was produced by George, and although it did make money, it was nowhere near as successful as the first one. So the studio behind Fury Road was now doubting the project again. They cut the shooting schedule by a full 4 weeks, essentially killing the time allocated to shoot the beginning and the end of the film. With all the pressure of Happy Feet 2 not performing, a budget that was clearly not enough, and the studio that was not supportive, George kept calm, pushed on and started filming in the Namibian desert. Now, the Namibian desert is not forgiving, regardless of anyone's previous misfortunes, not at all. Temperatures here drop to near freezing overnight and as high as 40 degrees during the day. Winds are constant and sand gets into anything. With long 10 to 12 hour workdays, costumes that are made of leather, plastic or barely anything, both crew and cast grew rapidly exhausted and less patient. But the war boys seem to have fun.
Eat more duh! Eat more duh!
This character type was based on some degree to the kamikaze pilots, those young warriors who sacrificed themselves bravely so they could ascend to some sort of warrior paradise. George Miller recruited an actress called Nadia Townsend to look after the war boys, who were all stuntmen by the way, and trained them to become zealous and electrify the entire production. Nadia had around 30 stuntmen to train, and all she had to work with were hours and hours of recorded video of George Miller discussing the backstory of these characters and the world. The other instruction was to behave authentically as if in a documentary, regardless of where the camera was pointed. And boy did they deliver.
The next time I come on the set, every fucker with a shaved head presents. Thank you.
Yes, Daddy.
Yes, Daddy. Daddy loves you.
Five months into the taxing shoot in the desert, and patience was running thin. With no script, little direction from George Miller, amid literal chaos, Tom was the first to start doubting the project, and Charlize wasn't far off. Both are professionals at their craft, but at the same time they are human beings. Every single one of the crew was working hard, and the stakes were high. A simple error could delay the production by days that they didn't have. Moreover, every day was a big stunt day with barely any time to mount 2 or 3 takes. There was no option to take a break either. They had 6-day work weeks and 1 day off, and they were thousands of miles away from home, living in the Nigerian city of Swakopmund, which made it impossible to arrange a flight to go back home and then be back in time on set. For Tom, it was the added pressure that he had big shoes to fill. He was a young, non-Australian actor replacing the legend that is Mel Gibson. So he went into survival mode. He started challenging any choreographic decision, would ask for longer takes, and storm off the set when things wouldn't go his way. At the same time, this pushed Charlize over the edge. An actress committed to giving her all to the director found herself unsure of what the director wanted. At times they would be in the war rig all day in the heat, would drive around aimlessly, and at the end of the day had no idea what they shot or even if they got it right. Sometimes all George needed was a few seconds behind the wheel for a shot of her eyes, and Charlize would ask to finish the scene or do a few more takes to give George a variety of scenes to choose from. But he will say, nope, got what I needed, we're moving on. And when Tom started being late on set, Charlize got really furious, and that's when they started fighting each other. This would happen again and again, to a point where George started doubting in himself if he made the wrong decision casting Tom to play Max. And nobody on set could mediate the conflict. Other actors that were in the scenes with them, like the wives and Nux, were keeping quiet in the back of the rig, letting them have a go at each other in the front like two parents having a domestic. In the end, just as Max was completing his arc, Tom calmed down, to everyone's surprise, and delivered a moment of calmness to a scene that needed it. The moment when the characters decide to return to the Citadel. Tom's sudden softening was a shock to everybody, but as a method actor, his character was coming around too, finding a purpose and a solution for their situation. The tension between Tom and Charlize wasn't personal, it was just two people trying to do the best job they could in those circumstances. July 2014, San Diego Comic-Con. This was a year when the most anticipated titles were The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies, with Peter Jackson himself attending, and the Wachowskis' Jupiter Ascending. But when the trailer for Fury Road dropped, the internet burst into flames.
My name is Max. My world is fire and blood.
After editing no more than 400 hours of footage and more back and forth with the studio for a year, Mad Max Fury Road premiered on 15th of May 2015 in Los Angeles and was an immediate hit. The screening at Cannes resulted in a standing ovation, something unheard of for an action film. Considering George and editor Margaret Sixel finished editing the film 2 weeks prior to launch, it was at Cannes when some of the cast and crew watched the final product for the first time. They were themselves completely taken aback by the result. They knew what they were doing was special, but they didn't realize just how extraordinary it would be. At the Q&A with the director and actors after watching the film and Cannes, Tom Hardy had this to say.
I suddenly got what George was talking about, actually, because for 7 months, I think the most complicated piece for me, or the most frustrating thing for me, or the hardest part of it, was trying to know what George wanted me to do at any given minute. I have to apologize to you because I got frustrated. And there was no way that George could have explained what he could see in the sand when we were out there. And because of the due diligence that was required to make everything safe and to make everything, which is incredibly complex, so simple, and what I saw, which is a relentless barrage of complexities simplified. I mean, I knew he was brilliant, but I didn't quite know how brilliant until I saw that. That's my first reaction was, oh my God, I owe George an apology for being so myopic.
It certainly feels like the hardship the crew had to endure during filming seeped onto the screen. Some people argue that the chaos is what made the film unique, and it would have been different if it was filmed on a green screen. So, was filming for Furiosa as chaotic? Here's George talking about production in an interview with ABC News.
Did you always intend Furiosa to be its own film?
Yes, if contingent on Fury Road working and getting enough traction, that was the intention. So we said, okay, we'll go ahead and do it. Meantime, we were still sorting things out with the studio, which was pretty dysfunctional when we made Fury Road. It's the complete opposite now. They've been amazing. Very, very supportive and of the filmmaking process, and kind of trusted us to do the work, and we ended up with Fury Road, Furiosa. It was a difficult film to make, just logistically, the usual things with big films like this, making sure that everyone's safe at every level of the thing, dealing with weather and of course COVID and stuff, and eventually we're here today, having just finished the film a week ago.
Furiosa was definitely not as chaotic, but it was in the making for a few years. Considering George's creative process for Fury Road, which took such a long time to develop, I'm sure he has been thinking and rethinking the story of Furiosa since its conception back in 2001. Also, Nick Lathouris is credited as one of the writers for Furiosa, so I would assume he has been involved in polishing the story here as well. Yes, the shoot was 6 months instead of 9 in the desert, but that doesn't mean that the desert was kinder or that the stakes were not as high. What it means is that this time George was left in peace, not interrupted, which is always an excellent sign. Just trust the man to do a good job. Furiosa certainly has the potential to become a sequel that beats the first installment. The same crew was involved in making the film, the same stuntmen, with the only difference being that this is not a single chase sequence throughout the film. However, what we've seen so far online and the sequences, the trailers, it does carry the same intensities and energy as Fury Road. Did chaos make Fury Road? Well, it certainly helped. I think the determination of the entire crew, along with the vision and perseverance of George Miller, got them through an experience that many would have abandoned early on. I think they got to a point down the rabbit hole where they said, there's no turning back, we have to get through it, through the darkness, through the pain, and into the light on the other side, into a new day. And what a day, what a lovely day. Well, here we are at the end of the road. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the making of Fury Road, and if you have seen Furiosa already, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Is it better than Fury Road? At the same time, if you want to see an analysis of another post-apocalyptic production, stick around for our review of Fallout. As always, thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe, and until next time, I shall leave you in peace.